So I did a 33-minute long video recording, and also there was doing the video and just editing that video. It took me around 3.5 hours just to get all of this progress done. And then all of a sudden they just decided to drop in a new patch note. So pretty much that video became irrelevant and I need to make a new one. God damn it. Yeah, I shouldn't be even surprised at this point. Anyway, so instead of actually just redoing the video once again, I'm just going to be putting the footage over this video of the changes that they did and just leave it as it is. So all of the things that you're going to be hearing me say is just going to be from February the 2nd, but if any of the changes from February the 3rd is going to be added on top of this video as well. So yes, I'm not going to even do the video once again. And another thing is just going to be that, in my own personal opinion, this has potential being the best character in the entire game. I don't know why. After using the character for 7 hours, yes, I don't beat me up. Wait.
Baba Booey.
We're probably not even done with all of the patches because obviously on the PTS, they usually just drop out a couple of little patch notes regarding the Shadow Hunter, regarding everything. And yeah, I'm just going to say that right now at this very moment, Shadow Hunter has potentially of the best early game character in Trove, and he's probably not going to be even close. It is really strong nowadays for newer players. So get hype if you really do like the Shadow Hunter, because this last update actually made the Shadow Hunter really good. Now I'm going to be talking about all of the abilities like always. I will be just going over like the usual things. Passive ability, basic attacks, and all 3 abilities. And if I don't ramble a whole lot, then I maybe do also the hidden effects. If not, then probably I might do the hidden effects on a separate video, or wait until the Shadow Hunter just goes into the live server so I can actually talk about all of the updates regarding, you know, the hidden effects. Because pretty much only one of them actually did get changed. The other 2 pretty much remain exactly the same. So yeah, it is what it is. Anyway, so I'm going to be talking about all of this. This is going to be a really rambly video, so I apologize. I got no script. I literally, like I just mentioned, I literally was editing for 3.5 hours, and then all of a sudden this patch note just came out. I just logged in, did a little bit of testing, and here I am. So yes, anyways, I'm going to be talking about all of this in this video, all of the things that I know of. First and foremost, let's start talking about the Dark Whispers passive ability. As you're clearly going to see, that is a wall of text. This passive ability does like 4 or 5 different things, so I'm just going to be going over all of them right now. So the first thing that it says right there is just going to be that you shadow mark the enemies. It's going to highlight them even through walls. It's exactly the same as it is pre-patch. Pre-patch, it also does exactly the same thing. You can highlight enemies through walls, and the shadow mark actual symbol is actually a little bit different, but it is what it is. Anyways, so that's one thing. Number 2 is just going to be that you actually are going to be dishing out extra damage. According to my testing, it's around a 20% damage increase for the first 10 seconds of the enemy being shadow marked. So for example, if I actually do change a character, you're going to see that the shadow mark is just going to go away. So yeah, there you go. Let me just go into the Shadow Hunter. You're going to see that my damage just went and shoot up all the way to 1.3 mil damage per hit, and once this one goes away, you're going to see that my damage goes back down to 1.1 mil. That's essentially going to be the damage increase that you're going to read out on the actual description on the passive ability. So yes, that's another thing that allows you to do. And then the other thing is just going to be obviously the explosion that you're going to notice on the basic attack, which is still to this day kind of bugged out. I thought that they were going to fix this in this update, but they didn't. They only fixed out the damage problems with the class gen basic attack, but they didn't fix the problems with the actual passive ability actually just taking over the basic attacks. So hopefully they fixed that one out. I'm going to explain it more once I start talking about the basic attacks, but yes, the explosion is going to be part of the passive ability. That explosion is going to dish out 2.5 to all enemies around it, including the enemy that triggered the explosion. So 2.5 times damage multiplier, which is again not bad. Second to last thing that it will be doing on this passive ability is going to be that you are going to get seekers. You're going to see that whenever the explosion triggers, you're going to see those blocks going directly into my Shadow Hunter. Those blocks are going to be the arrows that you're going to see on the top of my head. Those are seekers. You use those seekers with your first ability, which is going to be Shadow Seekers, which I'm going to explain more once I start talking about the Shadow Seeker ability. But yes, the way that you actually do get Seekers is from this ability, like the basic attack passive ability explosion. And then last but not least is going to be the movement speed buff. Whenever you use a dodge, you are going to get a movement speed buff for 8 seconds that will grant you a 35% movement speed increase. That is a lot of movement speed increase, but fun fact, the very first version of this movement speed buff, it was 65%, but they lowered it to 35%. It's still good, don't get me wrong, 35% is a lot. Just to put it into perspective, the Bard movement speed buff is 40% and the Neon Ninja is 50%. So 15% less than the Neon Ninja in terms of movement speed is a whole lot. That is a lot of movement speed. So if you're running well over 200 plus movement speed, that means this movement speed buff will grant you well over 70 movement speed. And like always, it will stack with Path Painter and it will stack with all the movement speed buff in the game, making the Shadow Hunter one of the few characters that can actually reach out 300 movement speed. So that is pretty interesting. That is essentially the whole passive ability. Now let me just go and just talk a little bit on TLDR. First and foremost, you shadow mark the enemy. The enemy will be allowed to see through walls. Not only that, you are going to be dishing out extra damage for the first 10 seconds after the enemy has been shadow marked. And then it's going to be that the Seekers, you're going to get Seekers whenever the explosion triggers. Speaking of the explosion is going to be part of the passive ability when you do hit an enemy that has been shadow marked with your basic attack, and that explosion will dish out 2.5. And then lastly is just going to be the movement speed buff that is granted at plus 35%. That's essentially the whole passive ability. Now let's move on to the both basic attacks. So starting off with the first basic attack, which is going to be the non-class gem basic attack. And I think that I will be mentioning is that this is something that I would hope that they would fix it, and that is going to be regarding the actual damage output on this basic attack. So this basic attack, currently what it does is that it will do 4 times damage multiplier. As you're going to see, the projectile is going to be a whole lot different. This alongside the ultimate ability, which I'm going to showcase because it looks really funny. The arrow always is facing forward, so when you're shooting up, the arrow is still facing forward, but it goes up. It just looks weird. But yeah, it also is the same thing with the ultimate ability, which I'm just going to show you. It's so funny. But yeah, anyways, the basic attack is just going to be a new projectile, a new arrow, and that arrow is just going to dish out enemy 4 times damage multiplier. It used to be 2.5 times damage multiplier on pre-patch, so pre-patch is 2.5 times damage multiplier, 1 attacks per second at base, and you know, the 50 block range and being single target. Now the basic attack is going to be 4 times damage multiplier. Not only is a 4 times damage multiplier, it's also going to remain the 50 plus block range, which is still ridiculous range. And not only that, it now goes through enemies and through walls. So if you're going to see right around here, let me just target the enemy with shadow mark, and if I actually do shoot right over here, you're going to see that I am actually still hitting the enemy, and it will go through that enemy and still hitting all of the enemies. It is really good in terms of crowd control. But one thing that you are going to notice is going to be that my physical damage is going to be 50,000. 50,000 physical damage, that is going to be my actual physical damage. But if I actually do hit an enemy with my basic attack, my damage goes to 125,000. And if you multiply 50,000 4 times, that is not 125,000, that is 200,000. So I should have been doing 200,000 damage. But instead I'm doing 125,000 damage, which is going to be 2.5. The reason being is that you're going to see that I dealt 200k damage just for a little bit, and that is just going to be the actual damage output. The only thing is that the passive ability explosion is actually taking over the actual damage output on this basic attack. It actually does happen as well with the class gem, but in the case of the class gem, it's not that big of a deal comparable to this one, because this one is literally every single shot. So thanks to this passive ability, your AoE from your passive ability is the only one that is dishing out damage. Your basic attack is dishing out 2.5 times damage multiplier. So right now, thanks to this bug going on with this basic attack, the Shadow Hunter non-class gem basic attack pretty much remain unchanged. The only exception is obviously the basic attack goes through walls and through enemy. So Shadow Blitz, the class gem basic attack, first and foremost, you're definitely going to notice that the animation is a little bit different. Yes, they added VFX essentially to every single basic attack. and they changed the animation a little bit, so now you shoot sideways with your bow. I thought that was pretty cool. Like, not only the basic attack arrow looks different, so if I'm actually holding out the basic and I change costume, you're going to see that it goes from purple, this one is blue, this one is like pinkish, this one is red, and you get the point. It's essentially now costume actually are affected by the VFX, which I thought it was pretty cool. Anyways, so this basic attack got buffed twice, in fact. So it got buffed once on the actual update itself when it just dropped, so the day one version, and now with this new patch note that they dropped, they also buffed the basic attack once more. Just to explain a little bit before, if you have not used the Shadow Hunter ever since the day one version, which once again, keep giving it a chance every single time that you do see a patch note. Do not judge the character by the day one version. Look at the Chloromancer, look at the Lunar Lancer, and also look at something like the Bard. Like, day one Bard was terrible, and look at the Bard right now, it's much better. So yes, just keep looking at the patch notes, and once you do see the patch notes, give it another whirl. The problem with the Shadow Hunter with the Class Gem ability, what it was before, it was when you actually did shoot with your basic attack, the first shot was the only one that was dishing out 2 times damage multiplier. All of the remaining basic attack were dealing 1 times damage multiplier, so the character was pretty much exactly the same as it used to pre-patch. So the character only dealt like 1 times damage multiplier and only 2 times damage multiplier on the first hit on the basic attack. Only if the enemy is not Shadow Mark. So if the enemy was not Shadow Mark and you hit an enemy with the first basic attack, you would dealt 2 times damage multiplier. But if the enemy is obviously Shadow Mark, then the AoE explosion is taken into effect. You will be doing 2.5. Now in the last update that they dropped, which was on February the 2nd, and they actually just made so that every single basic attack now does exactly the same damage, and they increased the damage from 2 times damage to 3.5. That is really, really good. This is one of the reasons why the Shadow Hunter, I think, is one of the best early game characters in the game, if not the best early game character in the game. The damage output that you can dish out at the early game is ridiculously high. You are dishing out 3.5 times damage multiplier per shot, 12 times per second without the need of using attack speed. So if you want to put a little bit of a comparison, you know the Dino Tamer? You know that class that a lot of people really, really like, and it's one of the top dungeon grindings in the entire game. You know that class? Yeah, that class has the basic attack, while on ultimate ability, if you do hit the enemy directly, pre-patch right now does 3.5 times damage multiplier. So the Dino Tamer pre-patch right now on the live server is doing exactly the same damage as the Shadow Hunter per shot. But here's the catch. The Dino Tamer has a base attacks per second of 1.6. And it means that if you're attacking at max attacks per second, so 300%, you will be shooting at 4.8 attacks per second, so almost 5 attacks per second, doing 3.5 times damage multiplier. This one is dishing out the same damage while attacking 2.5 times faster than the Dino Tamer. This one is attacking at 12 attacks per second, dealing 3.5 times damage multiplier. And this is incredibly good because, number one, you don't need any setup in order to actually make this work. Number two, this basic attack, also another thing that you need to know is that since it does attack 12 attacks per second, it means that you don't need really high stats. So newer players are going to benefit greatly because you are going to be dishing out so many hits per second that it's just going to crit nonetheless, even if you do have really low crit hit. So it's just going to make the character all the more consistent for newer players, and it's still going to make the character just incredibly powerful. So 3.5 times damage multiplier and can go through walls is ridiculously good. So another thing that I need to mention is going to be regarding the passive ability bug, as you're going to see if I'm actually, because since the Shadow Hunter, when you press the basic attack once, you shoot 4 arrows instead of 1, it's only going to trigger the explosion on the very first arrow. So you're going to see I'm only shooting the very first arrow, and that's the only one that is doing damage. And as you're going to see, the first arrow is I was doing 162,000 damage, and the other arrows were doing like 127,000 damage. So, and the reason being is the same thing like regarding like the non-class gem ability version, and that is going to be that the very first hit on your basic attack is dishing out 2.5 times damage multiplier instead of what it should be 3.5 times damage multiplier. Just to put it into a perspective once again, so yes, that's the very first arrow only doing 2.5. But if I do it the other way around and just only hitting with the last arrow, you're never going to see the explosion just trigger. That's just because it only triggers on the very first arrow. Aside from that, like, still a really powerful basic attack. My god, like, you're going to delete enemies really quickly. That is so ridiculous. That is essentially the last update that they did with the Shadow Hunter. And yeah, so that is the Clash Gem basic attack. I really needed to go over the Clash Gem basic attack a whole lot because this was the biggest update that they did on the last patch notes. Now, let's move on to the next ability, which is going to be Shadow Seekers. So Shadow Seekers is going to be the arrows that you're going to see on the top of my head. The way that you get the arrows is going to be obviously due to the explosion of the passive ability. You're going to get those cubes, and those cubes are going to pretty much symbolize those arrows. And what it does is when you press the ability, you're going to summon those arrows right there. Those arrows are going to seek the first target that they see, and they're going to detonate on the enemy, dishing out damage. The damage is going to be very different depending on how many arrows you do have. So if you do have one arrow, it's going to dish out, I do believe it got buffed to 3.5 times damage. So right now, one arrow, if you only throw one arrow, you're going to dish out 3.5. But if you do have all 5 arrows, each and every single arrow is going to do increased damage. And that means that the Shadow Seeker is dishing out 11.5 times damage multiplier. Did I need to mention that that is multiplied that by 5? That is pretty ridiculous coming from an ability that pretty much has no cooldown and you can easily just get it essentially every 3 seconds. Yeah, the damage is just ridiculous. The only gripe that I have with this ability, also by the way, I will obviously be putting all of the damage numbers on depending on how many arrows you do have. The gripe that I have with this ability is that it is slow as hell. Just to put it a little bit into perspective, I'm just going to be racing those Seekers with my Shadow Hunter. You're going to see how slow they really are, and hopefully they just increase the projectile because they're really slow. I'm just going to be doing that, and I'm going to be running all the way directly into the target dummy, and I should have been there before the actual Seekers themselves. Do you want to know how much movement speed I actually do have on this Shadow Hunter? 78. Yes, it is slow as all hell. So yes, the movement speed on those Seekers are slower than my Shadow Hunter that has 78 base movement speed. So hopefully they just make this ability just faster. But aside from that being super slow, it just has ridiculously high burst damage potential. In other words, if you're not one-shotting with a 5 stack of this ability, then what the hell are you even doing? The only enemies that I see surviving this ability are Leviathans and Delph bosses. Anyways, let's move on into the next ability, Sun Snare. So Sun Snare, it is going to be almost exactly the same as it used to be. The only thing is that it got 2 changes. Number 1, it does a lot more damage. So it used to dish out 1 times damage multiplier on pre-patch, and now it does 4 times damage multiplier, which is pretty respectable damage. The other thing that it does right now is that it automatically shadow marks the enemy when you do hit an enemy. So if you do have 3 enemies just sitting right there, and this trap hits all 3 enemies, every single one of them is going to get shadow marked, and they are going to be stunned. Similar, it works exactly the same. The other thing is just that the proximity radius is just going to get increased. As you can tell, it has like around a 4 block range in proximity, and it's also going to have obviously larger range on its own. It's going to be really good in something like Cursed Skull because you can just literally just throw it down, spawn enemies, enemies will die immediately, and then you can just throw down another one and enemies will die immediately once again. It's going to be exactly the same thing as something like the Glitter Bomb, so yeah, you can just use that as you will. It's the same thing with like low mid delving in Monolith, so you can actually just throw down this and just have them detonate and kill all of the Monolith immediately. And then lastly that I'm going to be talking about, because since this is already a 27-minute long recording, I will be talking about Sacred Arrow. So Sacred Arrow actually did get buffed in the damage output. So the damage output, actually I don't remember, let me check. Alright, so I got the numbers right here, and I forgot to actually just check the numbers on this ability. And I also did notice that the Shadow Seekers are doing 11 times damage multiplier. Hashtag unprofessional. But yes, it's still not going to be any more of a difference. It's still 55 times damage multiplier. That is still ridiculous to think about. Now let's move on to Sacred Arrow. So Sacred Arrow is going to be the new ultimate ability on the Shadow Hunter. So what it does is when you press the ability, you're going to shoot an arrow. So this is the thing that I was just talking about. It's a little bit too bright right here, but when you're shooting the ultimate ability, it just goes directly, like facing forward, just going upwards. Like, what the hell? It's so funny. Like, look at this.
I'm a bird.
Okay. So yes, the Sacred Arrow, what it does is when you press the ability, you're going to throw down the, essentially almost the same as the Arrow of the Goddess, but it's going to be really, really slow. Once it does contact damage to the enemy, it's going to do a contact damage, and then it's going to apply a damage over time, dealing damage for the whole duration. So Sacred Arrow, another thing that you need to keep in note is, as long as you have energy on your character, you can still hold down the ultimate ability, and it will keep continuously throwing arrows, and all of those arrows are going to be doing stacking damage over time on one another. So if you're going to see me just throwing down one ultimate ability, it's just going to be dishing out the regular damage over time every half a second. If I have multiple ultimate abilities at the same time, if I just throw down 3 ultimate abilities, you're going to see 3 damage over time every single half a second. The damage got increased from 3 times damage multiplier to 5.5 times damage multiplier on the damage over time, and the timer got increased from 7.5 seconds to 8.5 seconds. So in other words, this will tag enemies 17 times before the damage over time goes away, and that is per arrow, so 17 times, doing 5.5 times damage multiplier. And to top it all out, the initial contact does 7.5 times damage multiplier, then it's going to dish out 5.5 times damage multiplier every half a second for 8.5 seconds, and the damage over time does stack with one another. That is absolutely ridiculous. This character, not only right now, is super easy to use, it does ridiculously high DPS, it does have ridiculously high burst damage potential, it is really, really good in the early game. This might be right now potentially the best character in the game. Like right now it's just ridiculous. Like a 3.5 times damage multiplier basic attack, stuns that does 4 times damage multiplier for some reason, seekers that can do a potential of 55 times damage multiplier, which is just dumb, and then the ultimate ability that can dish out 7.5 times damage multiplier, that the initial contact alone is already capable of one-shotting over 10 bosses, upwards of 3-star bosses. So literally every single boss can get one-shotted by 1 arrow contact damage from this ability. So that's the thing. Last but not least, it's just going to be that ability is dishing out 5.5 times damage multiplier every half a second for 8.5 seconds. And the cooldown also got reduced. You can essentially just go like this and then just keep going, activating pods, and then just activating more ultimate ability. If you're running energy regeneration equipment, like my god, the potential is just ridiculously high on this. Let me just equip energy regeneration so you can actually just see what you can do with energy regeneration. So you can just see right there, just activating the ability, just keep going like this, and then just throwing down more ults, and they just activating more ults, and they just throwing down even more ults, and you're going to see, yeah, those damage over time are stacking with one another, doing like 2 mil damage per hit, and I have only 81,000 physical damage with 400 crit damage. Actually, I really don't need to explain how dumb that sounds. So yes, Shadowhunter has ridiculously high DPS. It is really easy to use because it hits enemies like through walls and such. Like, I might consider this character right now the best character in the entire game after this patch. Before, it was smacked down in the middle as average because of the glitches regarding the basic, but now with this, if they keep it the way that it is right here, I mean, the Shadowhunter is going to be pretty much the most used character in the entire game, because a lot of people already like the Shadowhunter, and this is just going to make it just top of the line, the best character in the entire game pretty much. It's going to overtake that of Ice Age. It's crazy to think about because Ice Age in this patch also got nerfed. Ice Age got nerfed, Shadowhunter got ridiculous buffs, so I mean, I guess this character is ridiculous, man. It's so ridiculous to think about, like all of the buff and all of the things that you can just do with this character. With the ultimate ability dishing out the damage that it does. The Seekers just essentially having ridiculous burst damage potential. Your basic attack attacking 12 attacks per second, doing 3.5. this Sun Snare, even though it's pretty meh as an ability, but it can serve as a really good one-shotting crowd control ability for ads. So Curse Codes is just going to be, taken care of. And then dishing out 4 times damage multiplier, stunning enemies for 2 to 3 seconds. Yeah, Shadowhunter, I wouldn't be surprised if this Shadowhunter version gets tuned down a little bit. It's really strong. It's really, really strong. So I'm just going to say that that is so stupid. I'm thinking about it. I'm just looking at the patch notes right here, like 3.5 times damage multiplier. Why? But yeah, anyways, we'll be leaving all of the patch notes in the description down below. I'm just going to be sitting down editing this video. Yeah, I'm just going to say Shadowhunter, potentially top class in the game. That's going to be everything for me. Thank you for watching. Thank you for sticking around as always. Leave a like, subscribe for more content like this, and I hope to see you guys next time. Take care and keep on hunting, and let me know your thoughts on the Shadowhunter in the comment section down below. See ya.